Ugh. Hi, I think I just yawned when I started this. All right. Welcome. We are on the week 12 work today. Just a reminder, if you're watching this, double check your past stuff. Your last day to drop is coming up. So make sure the early stuff that cuts off on the last day to drop is May 5th. So check your discussions if you are doing the online stuff, the online class, and then check the early assignments. See if the last day to turn in is on May 5th, or last day to participate is on May 5th. All right. Make sure you get that stuff caught up before then because they get zeroed out. Today we're going to be just finishing up a very big chapter, a very important chapter in the book. And we started it last time. This is one of those chapters where I wish I was in class, and there's one part of it that I'm gonna wait to talk to you about in class, but for the most part, we'll just finish that one today. Before I go, we have a special guest. We have our Husky, the ELAC Husky, and this is the Com Studies Husky. And the reason why I'm showing this is if you follow, ELAC has a couple social media accounts, including Instagram, and the ELAC Com Communication Club and ELAC Communication Studies has social media. And this little guy, specifically this one, has been to where you been? I think the London trip, there was a bag mix up, but you went to San Francisco, New York City, you just did Knott's Berry Farms. You're going to Universal this weekend. And then there's a couple other places too. So could check the adventures there as well. I think London. This thing's getting around everywhere. So yeah. Just search for ELAC Com Club or Communication Studies. The Huskies on Communication Studies. All right, let's get into it. Chapter 23. I don't think I need the book. All right, so we went through the terms. Last video, we went through the terms. Now we are going to be talking about some of the big sections, and then the second slide where there's more terms. So let's go back to the big sections, how persuasion works. Now, when you're persuading somebody, you're trying to change something, right? Persuasion is a change. It really is. Because you're not really, even when there's this notion that if you tell someone to do something that they're already doing, that's persuasion, when in reality, the change is actually not them doing it. The change is them, whatever's hesitating them from doing it. See, that's the thing. So every time um, people say we need more or something, is that the persuasion or is it whatever's holding it back from being done, the persuasion? What's ever holding it back is being persuasion. Like if your parents tell you to clean up after yourself when you're a kid and you didn't do it, when they came at you again and they threatened, they didn't persuade you better. They just persuade whatever was holding you back is not that important. That was the persuasion. So anytime there's change, that is, and you convince someone to either change their mind or change their behavior, that is persuasion. And that's a difficult thing to do because changing views and actions are not easy. That's what that is what it is. But before I continue, I just want to say this real quick. You just finished your informative speech. Congratulations. But just a FYI, the informative speech was, actually informative speaking can be persuasive. Not saying that you use persuasive language in informative, but by just telling somebody about something can persuade somebody. And when you're taking an informative approach on certain things, you can actually be persuasive because you sound like a neutral arbitrator. That's why when I worked in politics and I did public relations and I spoke to the media, I always try to sound like a neutral arbiter, even though I was advocating for a certain point. I tried to make it sound like I was neutral because that gave me credibility over a person who is, trying to be purposely persuasive. All right. So don't knock informative. But we're talking pure persuasion here. We're talking convincing someone. And the best example of persuasion is the basic persuasion, the fundamental persuasion, which is asking someone out on a date. It goes back to, it is the first persuasion of mankind finding a mate, right? Finding a mate. Cave people, when they finding a mate, which I don't think they were as progressive as they are now. It involved clubs and stuff. And but still, that is convincing someone to go out on a date is a basic persuasion. And it's both of them actually, because you're changing the views, right? Before maybe they didn't think of you that way. And then the other one, see if I have it with me. The other one is you're changing their behavior, because if they say yes, then you're going out with you. If they say no, they're going to avoid you now. So either way, you're changing behavior. All right. So just keep that in mind. And that's important to note, because you're doing a problem solution speech. So you, same as before, you have 1, 2, 3 of your main points, right? And your main points. Right. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, okay. You have problem, solution. Now, my colleagues will do problem, cause, solution. I don't like that. I like problem, solution. It doesn't mean mine is different. I just think it's easier to remember. So what do I mean by that? Well, when you're trying to change, when you're doing problem, solution, you're actually doing both. You're actually trying to change a view, and you are trying to change behavior. The view part is this part here. This is the view part. Changing a view, right? The view part is the studying this problem. So take the election, for example, this election, 2024. There's a lot of issues out there. I mean, you're giving a speech about, Gaza, or if you're giving a speech about Ukraine or the border or school funding or anything like that, you're competing against the issue that people are voting for the most. When they do polls, the people are still, and usually this is the case in every election, is the economy. And which is kind of weird, because this is the lowest unemployment rate, the most wage growth, job growth, GDP growth, I think, in my lifetime. But inflation is what's, we might, Joe Biden might lose just because of the price of eggs and gas, which actually is more on corporate side, but politics, right? So if you're this, that's the noise. That's what the noise is. So if you're trying to convince somebody that your problem is important, you're trying to change their views. And then the second persuasion, because I said it's both in a problem solution, is this is the behavior part, the action part right here, where you're trying to say this is a solution we're going to do, what we're going to go with, right? We'll talk more about this and probably in person, how to set this up. By the way, just give you a hint about how it's set up. This one right here is like the overall problem. This right here is usually a smaller problem or a focal point in the problem that leads into your solution. So for example, one of the banned speeches you can't do is cartels, just like last time. Cartels are banned speech. So the overall problem, if I did a cartel speech, is the drug problem, right? The drug problem in this country, especially with fentanyl now. The smaller problem is a lot of the drugs and stuff is coming from parts of Mexico that are not controlled by Mexico. They're controlled by the cartels, the Mexican cartels, where the Mexican government can't get into them. Right? So you say overall problem, cartel land, solution, military intervention to cartel lands. Now, that's an extreme example, but you can see how that setup happened. There's a big problem here. And a part of the reason why this problem is happening, i.e., the cause, is because of this issue in it. And that's why this issue in it is going to be solved by my solution. See how that works? And I use the cartels as an example because it's an extreme example. Do I actually believe that we should send military into Mexico? No, that would be a horrible idea and would never work. And it would probably lead to worse actions, right? Fun fact, has the United States ever invaded Mexico in its history? Yeah, yeah, we have. So anyway, so you see how that works, right? All right, that's how persuasion works. You're trying to change views and you're trying to change behavior, and this is how you do it with your speech, right? So whatever solution you choose, usually, by the way, people go with the solution first and then they work their way up. But we're going to actually start with problems first today for participation. Complete persuasion versus incomplete. So Aristotle came up with this idea of persuasion, really the starting point of formal persuasion or academic persuasion is a better way to say it. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because the reason why I'm telling you this is because that he believes the complete persuader has all three: ethos, logos, pathos. Now, if you don't remember from the last video, ethos is ethics, right? It's morality, right? But the best way to remember ethos is ethics. Ethos equals ethics. Logos is logic, rationale, right? The reasoning part. So the best way to remember logos is logos equals logic. And then pathos, a little bit different, but that's the emotional take you bring in, or the emotion that you go after in the persuasion. But the best way to remember pathos is emotional path. Pathos equals path. Pathos equals path. In this case, the path is pathos equals emotional path that you take in the speech. So if you are ethical, logical, and you take the right emotional path, you are a complete persuader, right? That's the best. And usually complete persuaders not only lead to success, but they also lead to long-term, eternal, long-term success, right? Because incomplete persuaders usually get caught, usually get found out, or they usually fail in their persuasion. But here's the thing. I can't come up to you and say if you're incomplete, you're not going to be successful, because the fact is that there's tons of incomplete persuaders out there. It's just what they're doing is usually fake, or there's no longevity. And the best example of this, and we're going to go back to dating because it's the basic persuasion, is I bet you somebody that you know has dated or is dating or in a relationship with somebody who's missing one of those things, right? Ethos, logos, pathos, right? Maybe they're unethical. Maybe they lie to your friend or family member, or you. Don't mention the comments. You know who it is. No no snitching. But maybe they're unethical. They're lying. Oh, that person doesn't mean anything to me. Oh, there's only you, right? Unethical. Or maybe they're illogical. Yeah, we argue all the time and it doesn't seem like it's a good fit, but that means it's going to last. Opposites attract. They're illogical, right? Oh, yeah, this relationship started off by cheating, but this one's gonna last. Illogical, right? No logos. And then pathos, emotional path, is like they're really pushy and so forth with the relationship. And the reason why I say that is that's an easy example of an incomplete persuader, because usually those relationships don't last. And even if they're successful at the beginning, they're not going to be happy. Even if they last, it's going to be a not so happy relationship, right? By the way, don't start analyzing your family members. Don't go to your parents. Well, according to Professor Hyatt, no, don't do that. Um, but it's something to remember, right? It's something to remember. And that's the question I always ask the class, but I kind of gave it away already because I can't get feedback from you guys. Usually one of those is missing, right? Or both of them are missing. Two of them are missing. But for the incomplete persuader to be successful, but there's usually one of those three that the person relies on the most to be a successful incomplete persuader. And usually they're missing ethics and logic, right? They're missing ethos and logos. The one that they usually strive on and go for success is pathos, right? Emotional path. And the reason why it's important to note that is just think about this. Think about those relationships I asked you to think of. The person who kept the relationship going when it was unethical or illogical was probably, telling him, but I love you. You're the best. You're exactly who I want. Stuff like that. This is everything. They just don't want us together because they don't believe in us. right? They do that kind of stuff. So, and they go after the emotion when they're unethical, cheat, or illogical, arguing, right? It's gonna work because they go after the emotional path. I love you, baby. Stuff like that. Okay. Um, so, and the best example, and this is where we're gonna do a real world practical, is think about somebody who might be considered the most successful and complete persuader in history. And I'm going to tell you who it is, but just think about this for a moment. And when I say successful, it doesn't mean what they did was good. In fact, the person I'm going to talk to is actually did was absolutely horrible, but they were still successful at it. And that was because they were an incomplete persuader that relied on pathos, emotional path, and that is Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler is probably the most successful, horrible, incomplete persuader in human history, right? I mean, the German people, I always blame, when I look back at the Holocaust, I always blame the German people first. And I can say that, by the way, because I've lived there and I speak German. I'm half German. But the thing is, German people are to blame first, and then their leaders and so forth. But Hitler was the thing that got, his persuasion is what got the ball rolling or got it to the very end of its horrible path. And it's important to note that because here's the thing. We all know Hitler was unethical. Of course, the Holocaust, the oppression, his tactics, his all the horrible stuff. I mean, not just the Holocaust with the Jewish people and the oppression on homosexuals and gypsies and so forth, but the way he did the Blitzkrieg in London and some of his practices of repression on his own people, unethical. He was illogical. We don't, by the way, we don't mention how stupid Hitler is, or was actually, Hitler was. He was very stupid. And I think we romanticize evil a little bit too much. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, and like the most popular character in Star Wars is the guy based on the Nazis, Darth Vader. It's not Baby Yoda. And I can go to Walmart right now, down the street in Southgate here, and go buy me a Funko Pop based on George Lucas's interpretation of the Nazis. We romanticize it. And I think that's why one of the reasons why it comes back. But we need to say it out loud. Nazis were stupid. They were stupid. Not Hitler was stupid. He oppressed his own people to create one of the biggest, internal resistant movements. He destroyed his own people, killed his own people, eliminating a percentage of his own population, which would have been, a component, and so forth. He waged war on three fronts, right? In massive war effort, go East Europe, West Europe, south to Africa. Yeah, just absolute horrible, right? Dumb, 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 illogical. But the thing is, he used emotion to get the German people to his side. The German people felt betrayed by their own government. The German people felt like they were screwed over by the Allies who won the First World War. And they were administering hate on things that were new or things that to them that were foreign. And Hitler came along and took that emotion and ringed at it. And that's important. Aristotle, and that's why I'm mentioning it, because ethos, logos, pathos will be on the test. It's on the final. I just think it's important note for life. All right, we got to move on. Elaboration, likelihood model, persuasion, ELM. That's what, by the way, on the final, if it's on the final, which is a possible answer on the final, it would be ELM. All right, it will be under ELM of persuasion. And essentially, it's how your parents argued with you when you were younger, right? They tell you, your activities is costing us $2,000. That's a direct persuasion route, right? We're not doing this because it's costing us this much money. Direct persuasion route. Indirect persuasion route. You're going to take that action. What will grandma think? What will Uncle Teddy think? I don't care about Uncle Teddy, but that's the indirect when they go after the emotion, right? And the same thing if you're talking about homelessness. If you're talking about homelessness and you say, there's I think it's like 70 something percent of all the homeless in the Los Angeles area are unsheltered. So what does that mean? It means that they're out on the street, right? They're out on the street. I think that also counts for the ones that are in the cars and the derelict RVs and stuff like that. But they're pretty much out on the street. In New York City, it's like 30%. But here in LA, that's one of the main major reasons why we see so many is because around 70 or more percent of the unhoused or homeless population is unsheltered. That's a direct persuasion if I use that number. If I talk about, oh, what's it like when you drive by Skid Row and you see the people on the street and you wonder how many kids are living like that right now? Or you think about Cal State LA and it sometimes being the number one, which is true. It's Cal State LA is the usually the highest percentage of homeless students in its student population. It competes with Humboldt State. That's a true thing, but you don't say it like that. You say, think about the students who struggle at Cal State LA who are homeless and them trying to put together their lives while they're thinking about their future. Right? That's emotion. That's the indirect persuasion route. All right, just like before, if you have questions on this stuff, message me in Canvas or wait till we see each other in the in-person classes. We're gonna move on, thankfully. And we're gonna go over some real theories and stuff. I'm gonna go grab the book real quick. But get those terms down. We're gonna start with cognitive dissonance. This is important. You know, I'm gonna say this real quick. I'm glad the students who are still with us are with us because the last part of this class is, I think, the most important part of this class because it's teaching you stuff that is, I think people really need. I mean, we're going to talk about reasoning and stuff, but you're going to hear stuff that it's going to be like, oh, this makes sense. There are going to be theories in your college lives that you're going to be like, no, duh, like gravity. But at the same time, the first person to figure it out, or put a name on it. And some of this stuff is like that. And so it's important to know, and it's important to understand that there's studies that explain this stuff. So let's go. Final part, which I think, again, the most important part, talks a lot about human nature, like cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is any time you hear information that is against your attitude, beliefs, and values that causes you to have discomfort, psychological, emotional, physiological, emotional, mental, right? You hear something that doesn't, the word refers to thoughts, dissonance, lack of harmony or agreement. Any information inconsistent with your current attitude, beliefs, values, or behavior that you experience a kind of discomfort. So it's like when you get dumped. I know there's some of you who've never been dumped because you're perfect and you're flawless. But there are, when people break up, right? And you hear that person is not into you anymore. That's hurt. That hurts, right? Maybe it hurts your heart. Maybe it hurts your mind. Like, how did this happen? Or maybe it hurts you physically where you're just like crying. Um, that's cognitive dissonance. It's, when you find out, I use the example of, there's this one grandparent I have that over the years I found out this grandparent is not as good as I thought. And I found out like last year another thing about this grandparent, and I was like, how low, much lower? But I felt discomfort finding that out, and it was just, yeah, it was hard to take in, and that hurt. I think mentally, not emotionally or physically, but it hurt mentally. Like, really? And it's that kind of stuff. Now apply this to the real world, right? Apply this to the real world. Think about the issues out there. Think about finding out that you're not what you believe is not the most popular, and it voted out of office, right? You lost the election. Like we have gay marriage was passed um by the Supreme Court, and recently Congress solidified gay marriage with the law. But up until that point, gay marriage, every time it went on to the ballot as a proposition, It usually failed. It failed. In fact, it was California. It was California that banned gay marriage on the state constitution. That triggered the case, which, by the way, I predicted. I predicted that was going to happen. And there's a radio interview that I'm on that I predicted that. But that's the thing that triggered the Supreme Court case. But imagine here in liberal California, where we have probably the capital of gay rights, gay lifestyle, and so forth, or what people think of, for the most part, San Francisco, and your own state, that also Hollywood and other places with vibrant gay communities, and you find out your own state voted against your basic rights. It hurts. It really hurts. And then sometimes that pain of finding out you're not popular, not what you thought it was, is used in a very unethical way. And the best example of this, and I'm going to say my opinions on things, you know that, but my opinions are just that, my opinions. I'm using it as an example, and I want you to develop your own opinions. All right. So I'm just going to put my opinions out there. Here's my example, and you can come up with your own thoughts on your own. But think about this for a second. The January 6th, the people who think the last election, presidential election, was stolen. We have people in the FBI, Justice Department, Republican governors, Republican Secretary of State, Republican leaders, all coming out saying not only was it not stolen, is one of the most secure elections of all time. And yet, because their candidate did not win, there are people who still believe that the election was stolen, even though they have all this evidence, and all the evidence that they've shown that they said it was stolen have proven to be false, misleading, or just plain lies, right? And they got that thought, the discomfort in their head, not just mentally, but emotionally and even physically. When you get mad, that's a physical reaction, right? When you're and you're yelling and you get red in the face, that's a physical reaction. So much so that they physically went and protested and broke down the doors. After Donald Trump got elected in 2016, there was mass protests against the election, because of the person who got the most votes did not win the election. The person who got less votes won 2016. Because of the electoral college, and there was mass protests, right? People were upset and they vented, and they showed it with their protest. But it was a new level where people were hungering for lies, and they gravitated towards those lies because they felt that discomfort, cognitive dissonance, and they then did what they did. Self-actualization. Self-actualization is exactly how it sounds, whatever your ideal part of you. So what I mean by that is, let me give you the official definition. Self-actualization is the need to fully realize one's highest potential. That's self-actualization, your highest self. That's going to be important for something we're going to talk about later. But it's your actual highest, your dream job, your dream person that you want to be with, dream car, self-actualization. Fear appeal. Fear appeal is anytime you use fear to motivate someone to, because this is all about motivation. Fear appeal, negative motivation, known as fear appeal, takes the form of if-then statements. If you don't do this, then this will occur. You can use it as long as you're ethical. Like, for example, during COVID-19, it was perfectly ethical, the pandemic, to tell people, hey, you might die if you get this, especially since we don't have a vaccine or really successful treatment at this time. That's perfectly ethical to do that. I don't think they did the right messaging, but it was perfectly ethical to warn people about the possibilities, right? And so forth. when they do the anti-drug stuff, I think they do bad messaging with the anti-drug stuff, but it's perfectly ethical to say, hey, you tried this for the first time, you might die, which is actually has happened, right? One of the weirdest drug things I ever heard was people who take like ecstasy and those rave type drugs. One of the ways they die is by water intoxication, where they drink so much water because of the drug. Um, that when I heard that, I was just like, that can't be real. And might not, who knows? But you understand, right? Favorite pill is fine as long as you're ethical about it. Persuasion is fine. We'll talk about the negatives later. Social judgment theory. Social judge, by the way, hint, hint, nudge, nudge on all these. Social judgment theory is exactly how it sounds, right? It's when you make that judgment, either you're going to affirm, like you're going to vote for something, or you're going to vote negative, you're going to be vote against it, or you're non-committal. You're like, whatever. And it's usually kind of dictated how you feel in society, right? How you feel about it. So, like right now, we're going through the 2024 election, and I would say the social judgment is we don't like either candidate. So there is a lot of people. I mean, we pretty much know who Donald Trump and Joe Biden is, right? But there's still a percentage of people who are like non-committal. And right now, there's a lot of people on the left who are upset with Joe Biden because of mostly because, well, some of the things he didn't do, but mostly right now is with Gaza and Palestine. Um, that is, so they're like, I'm on the left. He hasn't been doing enough, and so forth. And the same thing on with Donald Trump. There's a lot of people, and they're like telling each other, we got to support him no matter what, because scary Joe Biden. And so there's that kind of social pressure, and that's where social judgment theory is. Like you're gonna, from if you believe in the evangelicals God, then you have to vote for Donald Trump, or if you're like we got to support. We got to show that we're upset with Biden, so we're gonna make sure young people vote against or stuff like that. That's social judgment. When you start saying everyone's doing it, think about your parents for a second. Think about when they argued with you. If you take drugs, then you're gonna die. That's social judgment theory as well. Saying, hey, if you do this, then this will happen. Oh, I'm sorry, that's fear pill. I'm getting confused here. That's fear pill. I forgot to mention your parents. I'll do that later. Forgot to mention your parents. My bad. That's my bad. That's my bad. But social judgment theory is like, hey, everyone's doing it, right? Everyone's doing it. You gotta do it. You gotta do it. Proposition, anytime. I'll give you the official definition. Proposition is a statement in which you want your audience to agree. Like, hey, we all need to support Ukraine. Or hey, we all need to support Israel. Or hey, we all need to support Donald Trump. Or hey, we all need to support Pepsi. Actually, that last one, we all need to support Pepsi. We need to make it number one. I like sugar Pepsi. It's my favorite. Anytime you're trying to change a viewpoint, a view, or behavior, it's a proposition. Proposition of fact is anytime you're trying to think if something's true or false. Proposition of value, whether it's right or wrong. Proposition of fact and policy kind of falls into this area here of changing minds. Anytime you're changing minds, you're either proposition of fact or proposition of value. When you're trying to change behavior, like here's some value right here, right? You're trying to convince people it's a problem, but the overall problem solution speech is changing behavior. That's a proposition of policy. Anytime you're trying to change behavior and have people take an action, that is a proposition of policy. All right. That's important to remember. Proposition of policy. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. All right. So let's go over these again. And I'm going to tell you some things about from the book and so forth. But it's important to know, again, this stuff is not just important for this class. It is so important in your everyday lives. Think about people you argue with or people you have to deal with. A lot of this stuff is there. Cognitive dissonance. You feel that uncomfortable. Now, I went over the unethical part of it, right? I already told you how people are manipulated with it. So, how do you do it ethically, right? How do you get through cognitive dissonance ethically? Your book says it, and I totally agree with it, and I go over it more, so much so that it's a test question in the lecture part. What's the best way to connect with people? It's the best way to, find your references, the best way to connect with people, go after their self-interest, right? Because everybody, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, is is basically selfish, right? Survival selfish, right? Not selfishness, that's bad. But just having basic selfish is a survival tactic, right? I need to collect the food so I live, right? That's basic. So if you go after their self-interest, you can, because that's the thing. If you say something that people disagree with, they're going to feel that discomfort. So if you go after their self-interest, so I'm going to use my example from my political days. I'm very much on the left, Democrat operative, blah, blah, blah. Um, but I was very good at appearing in front of people that did not like my side of the equation because of a lot of my personal background or the examples I used, right? And it's important to note that because I did that. I talked about like my military service, right? I talked about my military service. People on the right tend to like the military. They tend to respect the military, or maybe they even were in the military. So if I talked about my military service, they're like, "Oh, we disagree with him, but we kind of respect his military service." Or if I use examples, like one of the big things, like when people debate universal health care, they focus on the uninsured, right? What if you're insured and you're sitting here, someone saying we need government run healthcare, and somebody else got in their minds and says government run healthcare will wreck my healthcare. Oh no. So instead of talking about the uninsured and patient rights and so forth, and those people who are anti-government insurance tend to be conservative. So if you talk about economics, like it's better to have um, health insurance, universal health care, because that's what our economic rivals have. They don't rely on private insurance like us, and it holds us back, right? That's going after something that they respect, the economy or national security. It's a national security issue. If you look at your recent history, Hurricane Katrina, one of the big tragedies of Hurricane Katrina was the healthcare system for the survivors and so forth, because it wasn't really there, and it was because it was relied on heavily on private insurance, and they were having that conflict. So that's how you go after. You go after people's self-interest. If they tend to be on the left, you talk about helping others and stuff like that. They tend to be on the right. You go after things that they care about. That you audience adaptation app for their self-interest, right? That's fine as long as you're ethical and you don't lie. And that makes them feel better about whatever you're proposing if they feel like it's something they're comfortable with. You make it closer to them, they feel more comfortable with it, and you ease the discomfort of cognitive dissonance. There you go. Voila. All right. Maslow hierarchy of needs. That I'm saving for the class. Fear and negative thoughts. We already talked about it. I need to talk more about the negative thoughts because that's what fear pill is negative thoughts. Like, oh my gosh, I might die if I do this. And it's like I said, it's ethical, right? It's very ethical. Like when I lived in Yosemite National Park, I really don't think they did a good enough job to scare the tourists about the animals. I once was on the trail and there was a the thing that kills people the most in my time in the park um was the with the deer, especially the male deers with their antlers, right? Not the bears, but the deer, because the antlers, right? And other things as well, their hooves and accidents and stuff like that. And I saw this one parent trying to get their kid close to a male deer with the huge antlers, and I yelled and I cussed them out. And the parent was not happy with me cussing with in front of their kid. And I just said, listen, you bleepity bleep, that thing has killed more people than the bears and mountain lions combined with their antlers. And I talked about a recent case and I yelled and I cussed at him. And the kid was like 8 years old, 8 or 9 years old, because when the parent finally shut up and heard what I said, they grabbed the kid and moved the kid as quickly as possible. And the entire time, this is real, the 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 kid looked at the parent like, "Are you stupid?" That was funny. It's like, "Are you what the hell?" But the thing is, using fear pill is a good thing sometimes, is you're ethical, but unethical is a problem. Just think about some of the social issues. Think about social stuff. Again, I wish I was in class with you. Some people will always talk about LGBTQ, right? LGBT plus. That's the one I use. I tend to use more. LGBT plus is being demonized right now. And it's kind of weird, especially with the trans community, because back in the early 80s, when transgender became a new thing in a way, because there was like the first transgender Playboy model happened in the early 80s and stuff like that. There was like stories on TV shows, like positive transgender stories. And there was no backlash, right? The Love Boat, which was like, ask your grandparents. That's how like all American it was, right? And there was a transgender story on that thing. But now, because of the elections and because demonizing maybe gets people to vote on the conservative, and here's another thing, and people not don't like it when I say this, but there's a history of people using gay issues to try to get Latin and African American voters to vote for Republicans. You can look at the 2000 election with those volunteers at the voting booths. There's tons of examples of this, right? But that's what they're used for. They're used in an unethical way to try to get people to move their viewpoints and so forth. And they demonize because they do. They talk about the kids stuff. They're like, oh, you got to worry because they're predators. When in reality, there's every week there's a new religious leader that gets caught doing that stuff. And then the other one they do is like, oh, the male, the birth population and so forth. In reality, that doesn't matter, but they demonize. And there's more to it, but that's a good example. I think the best example is immigrants and the undocumented. I grew up around the undocumented community in Fresno. Down the street was Motel Drive. They would come in on the weekends from the farms. This was before NAFTA, of course. And and so when people say, "Oh, you got to worry about the migrants and they're all evil and so forth," I'm like, "Who are you talking about? They were like the best neighbors. They were like you never had any problems with them. You were sad when they would leave off the weekends because then Motel Drive would just be nothing but the people that you do have to worry about." And it was just weird to me that people demonize migrants and undocumented who are a lot of them, especially at the border, are refugees now. And this is where fear appeal is problematic because the negative thoughts are being used to demonize, and you get people to think things that are just not it. Like they've done polling with Midwestern people, people in like Illinois and Minnesota up north, and they're worried about people crossing the border for their personal safety. Yes, yes, they're crossing the border and they're coming right to you in their St. Paul, Minnesota. But that's the thing. They do that. They fear that because of all the demonizing and so forth, the crazy fear appeal. And this is so bad that they've polled people. And you remember open-ended question? This one poll asked people, what do you fear about people crossing the border? And these are people, again, in Minnesota, stuff like that. And they were like, we fear that they're going to cross the border and come up and take away our vacation homes, take over our vacation homes. But are you giving out their address at the border? I mean, how is this? But more than one person said that in that poll. Fear appeal. When it's unethical, it can really do a lot of damage. It can lead to violence, and in best case scenario, it leads you to looking dumb. But it has led to violence. I mean, that's what racism, prejudice, fear appeal. All right, audience and social judgment. Oh, by the way, I mentioned your parents. Fear pill uses the if then thing, and your parents probably did that. If you take drugs, then you will die. If you go out on a date too early in life, you'll get pregnant or you'll get someone pregnant, right? And they use that instead of maybe sitting you down and telling you about consent and condoms and what else? And reasonable alcohol use and so forth. I always say that the if then the parents doing that, it's not effective because in people's own family, they might know somebody who takes, does something that they're saying don't do, and they do it and they're still living. It's hard to say, wait a second, you're saying don't do this, but Uncle Joe over there or Aunt Tina, right? You can't. So if then is very problematic in us when there's reasonable exceptions around you. All right. So it has its limitations. Audience and social judgment. If everyone's doing it, then you should do it too. This is where advertising comes in. That's why I mentioned audience and social judgment, is because audience will come in and I mean they'll come in and say if everyone's trying the new taste sensation, bubbly water with no flavor. Ooh, only weird people like me love this stuff. I do like this stuff. I'll drink that just cause I'll chew that over regular water. I know I'm weird. Anyways, but that's the thing. That's a way people use social judgment. I think the most unethical one is, and what we're seeing with the election stuff, is when they're saying that the election was stolen. And they're not just saying that the election was stolen and they have the evidence. They'll say stuff like, well, everyone knows that last election there was a lot of problems. Who? And then the press will hear that and they'll say, what do you, they'll just brush it us off like, oh, we know but they don't stop them right there and say, what are you talking about? What's your evidence? They don't stop and say that. And you hear them in their rallies and so forth saying, we know that the election, all the smart people know that this election was stolen. And you're like, wait a second, but all the actual facts say different. So who's the smart person? The person who denies the facts or the person who just wants people to support them because they're raising money or stuff like that? See how that works? Yeah, social judgment is also has to do with ethics because people go after people's motivation, and we'll talk about it with fallacies, and they make them feel better or make them feel smart when in reality it's not making them better and it's not definitely making them smart. But telling them that they're like everyone's saying no or everyone's saying yes or everyone's saying not this election. Trust me, before this happens, you're gonna probably see some major voices say, hey, you know what? Just sit out this election. I'll guarantee at least one major voice or celebrity will do that. I think that would be the last ditch tactic. I don't know who. Elon Musk. You never know. You never know. You might be someone that rhymes with Tusk. You never know. All right. I mean, elongate this too much. Oh, I'm bad. That was bad. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. All right. Last but not least, propositions. Propositions are anytime you're trying to change your mind. We already talked about it already. Remember, propositions of fact and value is when you're trying to change your mind. Proposition policy when you're trying to change behavior. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. All right. So remember that anytime you're saying, hey, mom, I think we can agree that we need to do something about my sister, right? That's the proposition right there. You're trying to tell your mom that something needs to be done about your sister. That's a proposition right there. Whether or not it's factor value, why you're like saying something wrong with my sister, or it's a proposition of policy like, oh, we need to do an intervention, or we need to cut off her credit card, or whatever that is. Right? We got to cut off her phone. So that's how it works. All right, that's it for this chapter. It's a big chapter. It's an important chapter. This is the chapter about persuasion, and so forth. Lots of questions on the final comes from this chapter. So, yeah. Oh, I forgot to hide it in the video, so I'm doing it right now at the end. I talked about big problem, little problem, right? Big problem, little problem. I want you to in the participation today, I want you to say your topic, and then on the line right after, say the overall problem. Like in this case, the cartels, drugs, uh, um, drugs in America. Problem two, the smaller problem is drugs from cartel land, right? Cartel land, right? And that's it. I'm not asking for a solution, just the overall problem, and then the lot smaller problem that leads to a possible solution. All right. So that's what you're doing. Topic, and then the two. And by the way, you don't have to write complete sentences. You don't have to explain it. Just write keywords. Keywords. So I could put cartels, drug problem, cartel land. That's it. That's it. We're just brainstorming here. All right. You guys know what to do. Get this done. We're almost done with the semester. Peace. Peace. I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. That was so bad. All right. It's end.